In the dead of night, inside the walls of a state prison, a female warden crossed a line that should never be crossed. What began as forbidden whispers turned into a night of passion behind locked doors. By morning, the inmate's body told a disturbing story, his manhood swollen, his silence louder than words. What really happened that night? And how did a trusted official risk it all for a secret that could destroy them both? This is the shocking case of the warden and the inmate. Stay tuned, because what you're about to hear will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about prison life. Welcome to Dark Motives, the place where the hidden truths of real-life cases are uncovered. Tonight we dive into the shocking story of a female warden who crossed every line of duty, risking her career, her freedom, and her life for one night inside a prison cell. Before we begin, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the stories others are too afraid to tell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. And while you're here, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach across the world. Now, let's step inside the prison gates and uncover how a forbidden relationship spiraled into a scandal that would shake the entire correctional system. Our story begins in Huntsville, Texas, home to one of the oldest and most notorious prison complexes in the United States. For decades, the Huntsville unit has been a place of discipline, control, and rigid authority. But behind those towering walls, temptation and human weakness can thrive in the shadows. The warden at the center of this scandal was known as a strict but respected figure. Colleagues described her as sharp, commanding, and someone who kept order with an iron grip. But beneath the uniform and authority, she carried secrets, loneliness, personal struggles, and a craving for attention she wasn't finding outside the prison gates. On the other side of the bars was an inmate with a reputation. He wasn't just another prisoner serving time. He was charismatic, manipulative, and dangerous in ways that didn't always show on paper. Fellow inmates said he could charm anyone in the room, whether it was through his quick smile or the way he made people feel like they were the only one who mattered. It was in this unlikely setting that a spark began to flicker. A warden with power, an inmate with charm, and a prison where secrets are hard to keep but impossible to resist. At first, the contact between the warden and the inmate seemed harmless. She walked the tiers with the authority of her badge, and he remained just another prisoner in the system. But guards began to notice something unusual. The inmate often lingered near her office during her shifts, and somehow, he always seemed to catch her eye. It wasn't overt, not yet, but in a place where rules mean survival, even a glance too long can set off alarms. The prison environment thrives on routine. Every movement is scheduled, every conversation monitored. Yet whispers began to spread among the inmates. They noticed how she slowed her pace when walking past his cell, how her tone softened when she addressed him. In a world where toughness is currency, a small gesture of kindness was enough to make the others wonder. Staff members weren't blind either. A correctional officer reported that she once let him stay back after work detail, giving him what she called extra duties in the administrative wing. On paper, it looked like discipline. In reality, it gave her and the inmate rare moments of privacy. And in a prison as strict as Huntsville, privacy is the most dangerous luxury of all. Some officers brushed it off. They believed she was simply being lenient, perhaps too lenient. But those who had worked the system long enough recognized the warning signs. Lines were blurring. Authority was softening. And a relationship was taking shape that should never have been possible. For the inmate, this was opportunity. For the warden, it was temptation. Each stolen glance, each hushed exchange in the dimly lit corridors, was another step toward a line they couldn't uncross. The prison walls that kept the world out now held their secret in, and with every passing day, suspicion grew thicker, like smoke rising before a fire. It started small, moments so brief that they could almost be denied if questioned. A brush of the hand while passing documents, a whispered word that lingered longer than it should have, a door closed just a little too quietly. These were the cracks in the armor of authority, and the inmate knew how to exploit them. Late one evening during her rounds, she found herself lingering outside his cell. Their conversation was casual at first: weather, food, the monotony of prison life. But in the stillness of the night, when the rest of the block had fallen silent, words turned into something more personal. She listened to him in a way no one else did, and he fed her the kind of attention she had been starved of for years. Before long, she began orchestrating chances for them to be alone: a late-night file check in the administrative office, an extra round that conveniently aligned with his work detail. Every encounter chipped away at the thin wall separating professionalism from desire, and once that wall cracked, there was no repairing it. The first physical touch was quick, almost accidental, but the electricity of it lingered, and neither of them could forget it. The boundaries had been crossed, and the secret they now shared bound them together in a dangerous game. What began as stolen glances and whispered words grew into longer visits, locked doors, and hushed breaths in the shadows of Huntsville's stone walls. To the outside world, nothing had changed. She wore the uniform, carried the keys, and walked with authority. But behind those doors, in the hours when the prison slept, she was no longer the warden. She was something else entirely, a woman risking everything for a man who had nothing to lose. It was a humid Texas night when the warden made her boldest move yet. Under the cover of routine rounds, she slipped into the secured wing and unlocked the door to a room rarely used at night. Inside waited the inmate, nervous, but smiling with the confidence of a man who knew he had already won her trust. For hours, the two were shut away from the world. What began as whispered conversation escalated quickly. The authority she once held over him vanished the moment the door clicked shut. Behind those walls, uniforms and titles meant nothing. They were no longer warden and inmate. They were two people consumed by temptation, throwing caution aside with every passing moment. The night stretched on longer than either of them expected. Time lost meaning inside that dimly lit room. They laughed in hushed tones, whispered secrets they had never shared with anyone else, and crossed boundaries that could never be undone. It was reckless, dangerous, and thrilling, all rolled into one forbidden encounter. By morning, the consequences of their choices were written across the inmate's body. His manhood was swollen, a visible reminder of the reckless night that had just unfolded. But beyond the physical signs, there was something much heavier, a bond that now tied them together in secrecy. What they shared wasn't just a mistake. It was evidence that, if discovered, could destroy both their lives in an instant. When the first rays of sunlight cut across the prison yard, reality returned. The warden straightened her uniform, smoothed her hair, and prepared to face her staff as if nothing had happened. But behind her steady eyes burned the knowledge that there was no going back. That night had sealed her fate, and the walls of Huntsville prison would never look the same again. Secrets don't survive long inside prison walls. By the next week, whispers began to echo through the Huntsville unit. Inmates who lived off gossip started to notice the small details: the way the warden lingered near one cell longer than the others, the way the inmate seemed untouchable, almost favored. It started with murmurs in the chow hall. Some prisoners claimed they heard footsteps and voices late at night in restricted areas. Others swore they saw the inmate returning from places he had no clearance to be. In a world where every movement is tracked and every favor has a price, these were signs that something was off. The correctional officers weren't blind either. One guard in particular grew suspicious after noticing the inmate being excused from duties without explanation. On more than one occasion, he was seen walking unescorted near administrative offices, something unheard of for a prisoner of his level. Questions began circulating quietly among the staff, but no one dared accuse the warden directly. Not yet. For the inmates, the story was as good as currency. Rumors spread through the blocks, each version wilder than the last. Some claimed the warden was sneaking him out at night. Others whispered that she was giving him favors no other inmate could dream of. Whether true or exaggerated, the effect was the same. Tension thickened, trust eroded, and the walls of secrecy began to crack. The warden tried to maintain control. She carried herself with the same stern authority, giving sharp orders and keeping her voice steady. But behind her eyes was fear. Fear that the secret nights were no longer theirs alone. Fear that the prison she commanded was turning against her, one rumor at a time. The more the whispers spread, the more desperate the warden became to protect her secret. She started bending rules in ways that couldn't be easily explained. Security logs were altered. Camera footage from certain nights mysteriously went missing. Reports that should have been signed off by her superiors sat unfinished, buried under stacks of paper in her office. To the casual eye, she was still in control. But to those who worked closest with her, the cracks were showing. She snapped at officers for minor mistakes, avoided meetings she once led with confidence, and spent more and more time behind closed doors. For someone known for discipline and order, her behavior had become unpredictable, and that alone raised suspicions even higher. The inmate, sensing her fear, pressed his advantage. He asked for privileges, extra food, longer showers, lighter duties. And to the shock of those watching, many of his requests were granted. To the other prisoners, this was confirmation of what they already believed. The warden had been compromised, but covering their tracks was impossible in a place like Huntsville. The prison was a machine, and every shift, every detail, every key turn was accounted for. The more she tried to hide, the more obvious her behavior became. It was only a matter of time before someone connected the dots, and time was running out. What began as a secret between two people was now becoming a scandal waiting to explode. One mistake away from exposure that would ruin them both. The truth finally broke through the cracks. One night during an unexpected inspection, an officer noticed the warden's absence from her usual rounds. Minutes later, he caught sight of the inmate leaving a restricted wing, his uniform disheveled, his expression smug. It was the proof many had suspected, but no one dared say aloud. The officer reported what he saw. Within hours, whispers turned into formal allegations. The prison administration launched a quiet investigation, reviewing logs and questioning staff. It didn't take long for the missing camera footage and altered paperwork to surface. Every piece pointed back to the warden and the inmate who had become her weakness. But the most damning evidence came from the prison's own medical staff. During a routine check, the inmate's condition was noted, his manhood still visibly swollen, an injury consistent with prolonged sexual activity. It was a discovery that no excuse could explain away. When she was finally confronted by her superiors, the room was heavy with silence. They laid out the evidence one by one, each detail pulling the secret she had fought so hard to hide into the light. At first, she denied everything. She clung to her authority, insisting it was a misunderstanding. But the weight of the evidence was crushing. The confrontation reached a breaking point when the inmate himself was questioned. He smirked through the interrogation, offering just enough detail to implicate her without incriminating himself fully. His words were laced with arrogance, as if he knew the damage had already been done. For the warden, the walls of Huntsville prison had closed in. The place she once ruled had turned against her, and the secret that began as passion had now become her undoing. Exposure was no longer a threat. It was reality. The scandal spread like wildfire. Within days, the Huntsville unit was no longer just a prison. It was the center of a media storm. Reporters swarmed the gates, demanding answers. Headlines painted her as the corrupt warden who betrayed her badge for lust, while the inmate was portrayed as the cunning manipulator who played the system to perfection. Her colleagues, once loyal, turned away in silence. Years of hard-earned respect vanished overnight. Officers who had stood beside her now whispered behind closed doors, questioning how long she had been compromised and how much damage her actions had caused inside the walls. The authority she once commanded was gone. The investigation report was brutal. It included testimony, altered logs, missing footage, and the medical documentation that described the inmate's swollen condition, confirming what rumors had already suggested. To the court, it was undeniable proof of sexual misconduct inside her prison. The inmate, on the other hand, thrived on the attention. In his cell, he bragged to others about his conquest, fueling the rumors that had already stained her name. For him, The scandal was currency, proof that even the highest authority could be brought down by his charm. But for the warden, it was humiliation beyond repair. Charges were filed swiftly. She was accused of official misconduct, abuse of power, and endangering the security of the prison. Facing a courtroom instead of commanding one, she stood stripped of her title, her uniform, and her dignity. The woman who once held the keys now found herself shackled by her own decisions. But perhaps the greatest punishment wasn't legal. It was personal. The life she had built, the career she had sacrificed for, and the image she had carried for decades were gone. All because of a secret night that could never be taken back. The fall of the Huntsville warden stands as a chilling reminder of how desire can dismantle discipline, and how one secret night can become evidence that lasts forever. The swollen injury that exposed the truth became more than just a medical note. It was the moment the whispers turned into undeniable proof. It was the detail that transformed suspicion into scandal. For the inmate, it was victory. He returned to his cell with his sentence unchanged, but his reputation magnified. In a place where power usually belongs to the guards, he had managed to turn the tables, leaving a permanent stain on the very system that once held him down. For the warden, it was the end. Her uniform, her authority, her respect, all stripped away in the glare of exposure. She went from commanding a prison to standing on trial, her future erased by choices she could never undo. And for us, the question remains: was she simply human, lonely, vulnerable, and tempted in a moment of weakness? Or was she a corrupt official who abused her power and endangered the very institution she was meant to protect? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And while you're there, tell us where in the world you're watching from. We always love seeing how far these stories reach. If this case kept you hooked, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications. More true crime stories are on the way, each darker and more shocking than the last. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and remember, behind every crime, there's always a motive.